The emergency sirens wailed through the Imperial Citadel as another handler was carried away on a medical stretcher. His eyes stared at nothing, and his mouth hung open like a broken doll. The alien medics shook their heads as they rushed him toward the medical bay. He would never speak again. Commander Jiwon stood at the observation window looking down at the containment chamber 3 levels below. The massive creature inside moved like a living storm. Its scales were black as deep space, and each one was the size of a dinner plate. When it breathed, the air around it shimmered with heat and strange colors that hurt to look at directly. This was Void Render Kethmori. Once it had been the most trusted companion of Emperor Valdris. The dragon had fought beside him in 100 battles across the galaxy. Together they had conquered worlds and brought peace to warring systems. But that was 3 years ago, before the assassination, before everything went wrong. The dragon was the size of a small starship. Its wings could span the width of the chamber when fully extended. Its eyes glowed with a terrible purple light that seemed to burn through metal and flesh alike. Those eyes held a madness that made even the bravest soldiers step back from the reinforced viewing windows. Dr. Hayuk adjusted his instruments and shook his head again. The readings were impossible. The creature was generating psychic energy levels. That should have been deadly to everything within a kilometer. The containment field was the strongest ever built, but it flickered and sparked under the constant assault of the dragon's mental screams. 18 handlers had tried to bond with the creature. 18 had failed. Most died within minutes. The lucky ones only lost their minds. The dragon rejected every attempt at contact with a fury that left scorch marks on the chamber walls. The creature had been like this since the day Emperor Valdris died. The psychic bond between dragon and rider was supposed to be unbreakable. When the Emperor was murdered by his own brother, the backlash had driven Kethmori completely insane. The dragon had killed everything within 50 meters before the emergency teams could contain it. Now it lived in this underground prison. The Imperial Council wanted to find a new handler. The dragon was too valuable as a weapon to simply destroy. A single dragon rider could turn the tide of any battle. But first, someone had to survive long enough to form the bond. Jiwon turned away from the window as the next group of candidates entered the briefing room. There were 12 of them this time. All were volunteers. All knew they would probably die. The bounty for successfully bonding with the dragon was enough to buy a small planet. Most of the candidates were alien species with natural psychic abilities. There was a tall, blue-skinned Zenthari who could read minds across star systems. A crystalline Vorthak whose telepathic powers could control entire fleets. 2 short gray Mindari whose species had been bred for psychic warfare. At the back of the group stood a human. He looked out of place among the exotic aliens with their glowing eyes and strange features. His name was Minho Park, and he was completely ordinary. Brown hair starting to show gray at the temples, tired eyes that had seen too many battles, scars on his hands from years of military service. Jiwon frowned as she read his file. Staff Sergeant Park had served in the Outer Rim conflicts for 15 years. He was a good soldier, but nothing special. His psychic rating was 0. He had no telepathic abilities at all. He was what the scientific community called psychically deaf. So why was he here volunteering for certain death? The briefing began with Dr. Hayuk explaining the dragon's condition. The creature was trapped in a feedback loop of rage and grief. Every psychic probe sent its way only made the madness worse. The dragon attacked any mind that tried to touch its own. The Zenthari candidate raised a long-fingered hand. His voice was like music when he spoke. He explained his plan to use harmonic mental frequencies to calm the creature's mind. Several other aliens nodded in agreement. It was a sound strategy that had worked on other traumatized psychic creatures. The Vorthak made a sound like breaking glass, which was how his species laughed. He would simply overwhelm the dragon's defenses with pure psychic force, crush its will and rebuild it from scratch. A few of the military advisors looked interested in this approach. When asked for his strategy, Minho Park just shrugged. He said he planned to walk in and introduce himself. The room fell silent. A few candidates made sounds that might have been laughter in their species. The human was clearly insane. But Ji-won noticed something in the man's personnel file. He had a daughter, Nari Park, age 12. She was currently in a medical facility on Kepler Station receiving treatment for a rare neural condition. The treatment costs were astronomical, the kind of money that only came from bounties like this one, a desperate father. That explained why a psychically deaf human thought he could succeed where telepathic masters had failed. Ji-won almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The first candidate entered the chamber at 800 hours. The Zenthari moved with fluid grace as he approached the dragon's cage. His mental shields shimmered around him like a soap bubble. He began his harmonic frequency technique immediately. The dragon looked at him for exactly 37 seconds. Then it screamed. The sound was not heard through the ears, but felt directly in the mind. Even through the reinforced barriers, the observers above felt their thoughts scatter like leaves in a hurricane. The Zenthari candidate collapsed instantly. Blood ran from his ears and eyes. His mental shields had been torn apart like paper. The Vorthak lasted longer, almost 3 minutes. His psychic assault actually seemed to annoy the dragon more than hurt it. When Kethmori finally retaliated, the crystal being shattered into 1,000 pieces. Literally. One by one, the candidates tried and failed. Each lasted a different amount of time, but none survived with their minds intact. The dragon seemed to grow more agitated with each attempt. Its psychic screams were starting to crack the containment barriers. By late afternoon, only 3 candidates remained. 2 more aliens and the human. Ji-won was about to call off the trials when Minho Park stepped forward. He looked tired but determined. In his hand, he held a small photograph of a young girl with bright eyes and a cheerful smile. His daughter. The reason he was here preparing to die, Ji-won wanted to tell him to go home, to spend his remaining days with his child instead of throwing his life away on an impossible task. But she had seen too many good people die in pointless wars. At least this death might have meaning if somehow the impossible happened. The chamber. Doors sealed behind Minho Park, with a sound like a tomb closing. Through the observation window, they watched him walk calmly toward the most dangerous creature in the known galaxy. He moved like a man who had already accepted his fate. The dragon turned its burning purple eyes toward the approaching human. Its massive head tilted slightly, as if puzzled by what it saw. Here was a mind it could not read, a consciousness that existed outside the psychic spectrum entirely. For the first time in 3 years, Void Render Kethmori fell completely silent. Minho. Park sat down on the cold metal floor, 20 meters from the dragon's cage. He took out his field rations and began to eat his lunch. Just a man having a quiet meal before what would probably be his final conversation. The dragon watched him with growing curiosity. This was not how handlers usually behaved. They came with shields and weapons and plans to control or dominate. This one came with a sandwich and what looked like complete indifference to his own survival. In the observation deck above, Commander Ji-won checked her chronometer. Minho Park had been in the chamber for 15 minutes. He had already lasted, longer than half the previous candidates. The dragon had not tried to kill him yet. That was something new. Minho Park had been sitting in the containment chamber for 2 hours. This was already a record. The previous best time was 43 minutes before the candidate started screaming and clawing at his own face. Commander Ji-won watched through the observation window with growing amazement. The human had finished his lunch and was now simply talking to the dragon, not trying to establish a psychic link or project mental dominance, just talking like he was having a conversation with an old friend. The dragon Kethmori listened. Its massive head rested on the chamber floor, and those terrible burning eyes focused entirely on the small human sitting cross-legged nearby. Sometimes the creature made low, rumbling sounds that might have been responses, or maybe just indigestion. It was impossible to tell. Dr. Hayuk kept checking his instruments and shaking his head. The psychic readings made no sense. The dragon's energy levels were actually decreasing. The mental storm that had raged for 3 years was starting to calm. But there was no telepathic contact between human and dragon. Minho Park had no psychic abilities at all. So what was happening down there? Specialist Somin pulled up the audio feed and increased the volume. Now they could hear what Minho was saying to the dragon. His voice was quiet and steady, like a father reading bedtime stories. He was talking about his daughter. Nari was 12 years old and the smartest person Minho had ever met. She wanted to be a starship engineer when she grew up. She could take apart a data pad and put it back together with her eyes closed. She made jokes that were so clever they took him 5 minutes to understand the punchline. She was also dying. The neural condition had started 6 months ago. First just headaches and dizzy spells, then seizures that left her unconscious for hours. The doctors on Kepler Station were doing everything they could, but the treatments were expensive. More expensive than a soldier could ever afford on military pay. That was why Minho was here. That was why he was willing to die trying to bond with an insane dragon, because Nari needed him to succeed. The dragon made another low sound. This time it almost sounded like sympathy. Kethmori had been bonded to Emperor Valdris for over 30 years. The relationship between dragon and rider was closer than marriage. It was 2 minds sharing one soul. When the emperor died, the dragon had felt every moment of his pain and terror. Now here was this human talking about love and loss and the fear of failing someone who depended on you. Kethmori understood those feelings better than anyone. Dr. Hyuk noticed the change first. The containment field stopped flickering. The psychic interference that had made his instruments useless was fading away. For the first time in 3 years, he was getting clear readings from inside the chamber. The dragon was not trying to kill the human. Instead, it seemed to be protecting him. The residual psychic energy in the chamber was forming a barrier around Minho Park, not to keep him away from the dragon, but to keep him safe from the environmental hazards. This was unprecedented. Commander, Jiwon made a decision that went against every protocol in the handbook. She opened a communication channel to the chamber below. Her voice echoed off the metal walls as she spoke directly to Minho Park. She asked if he needed anything. Food, or water, or medical attention. Minho looked up at the observation window and smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen him smile since arriving at the facility. He said he was fine. Then he asked if someone could bring him more pictures of Nari. He had shown Kethmori the one photograph he carried, but the dragon seemed interested in seeing more. Minho thought it might help if the dragon could understand what he was fighting. For 20 minutes later, a junior officer delivered a datapad loaded with family photos and videos. Minho spent the next hour showing the dragon images of his daughter. Nari as a baby taking her first steps. Nari starting school with a backpack bigger than she was. Nari in the hospital trying to smile through the pain of her treatments. Dragon watched every image with intense focus. Sometimes it made soft questioning sounds, and Minho would explain what was happening in the picture. The time Nari built a robot that could make pancakes. The day she won the junior engineering competition on her home colony. Her last birthday party before she got sick. By the 4th hour, the psychic storm around the dragon had completely disappeared. Kethmori was no longer the raging monster that had killed 18 handlers. The creature was calm and attentive, like a student listening to an important lesson. Minho stood up slowly and took a step toward the dragon's cage, then another step, and another. The massive creature watched his approach without any sign of aggression. When the human was close enough to touch the energy barrier that separated them, Kethmori pressed its great head against the field from the other side. The barrier was designed to contain the most dangerous psychic entity in the galaxy. It could stop telepathic attacks that would shatter planets, but it could not stop the simple human emotion that passed between man and dragon in that moment. Understanding. Dr. Hayek ran more scans and found something that should have been impossible. The dragon's brain patterns were synchronizing with Minho Park's heart rate, not through any psychic connection, but through something much more basic. Empathy, the recognition of shared pain and shared hope. Commander Jiwan realized she was witnessing history, the first successful contact with Kethmori in 3 years. And it was being achieved by a man with no special abilities except the capacity to care about something more than his own survival. The implications were staggering. If Minho could actually bond with the dragon, the Empire would have its ultimate weapon back. But more importantly, a good man might be able to save his daughter's life. She opened the communication channel again and asked Minho if he wanted to try entering the actual cage. The energy barrier could be lowered for a few minutes, long enough to see if physical contact was possible. Minho looked at the dragon and seemed to be considering the offer. Kethmori made a sound that was almost like a purr, a sound that had not been heard since Emperor Valdris was alive. The human nodded. He was ready to take the next step. As the energy barrier began to power down, Jiwan held her breath. In the next few minutes, they would learn whether a psychically deaf human could achieve what the galaxy's greatest telepaths had failed to do. Bond with the Emperor's shattered dragon companion. The barrier disappeared with a soft hum. Nothing stood between Minho Park and the most dangerous creature in known space, except trust. The energy barrier vanished, and Minho Park stepped into the dragon's cage. Up close, Kethmori was even more massive than he had imagined. Each of the creature's claws was longer than a man's arm. Its teeth were like swords, and its breath smelled of ozone and distant stars. But the dragon did not attack. Instead, it lowered its great head until it was level with the human's face. Those burning purple eyes studied Minho with an intelligence that was older than most civilizations. This was a creature that had seen the birth and death of suns, that had fought in battles across 1,000 worlds. And now, it was broken, just like him. Minho reached out slowly and placed his hand on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm, too, the touch and harder than any armor he had ever felt. But beneath that alien hide, he could sense something familiar. Grief. The same grief that woke him up every night when he thought about losing Nari. Kethmori closed its eyes and made a sound, like distant thunder. It was the first time the dragon had allowed anyone to touch it since Emperor Valdris died. In the observation deck above, Commander Jiwan and her team watched in stunned silence as man and dragon connected on a level deeper than telepathy. Minho sat down beside the massive creature and continued talking. He told Kethmori about the war on Vega Prime, where he had lost half his unit to enemy fire, about coming home to find his wife had been killed in a speeder accident while he was deployed, about raising Nari alone and trying to be both mother and father to a girl who was smarter than he would ever be. The dragon listened to every word. Sometimes it shifted position to hear better or made soft questioning sounds when something confused it. Slowly, Minho began to understand that these were not just animal noises. Kethmori was trying to communicate. Over the next several hours, they developed a simple system. The dragon would touch Minho's hand with the tip of one claw to ask questions. Tap once for yes and twice for no. Gentle pressure meant tell me more. And sharp pressure meant stop talking about that subject. Through this basic communication, Minho learned about Kethmori's past. The dragon had been bonded to Emperor Valdris since they were both young. They had grown up together, exploring the palace gardens and learning to fly among the floating cities of the capital world. The Emperor had been more than a rider. He had been family. When assassins struck during a diplomatic meeting on Proxima Station, both dragon and rider had been caught completely unprepared. Valdris died slowly from poison, while Kethmori felt every moment of his agony through their mental link. The dragon had tried desperately to save its bonded partner, but the killers had used weapons specifically designed to prevent psychic healing. The Emperor died in terrible pain, while his dragon companion felt helpless to stop it. The trauma had shattered Kethmori's mind and turned grief into rage. For 3 years, the dragon had been lost in a spiral of fury and self-blame. Until now. Minho understood that kind of pain, the helplessness of watching someone you love suffer, while being unable to fix it. He knew what it was like to feel responsible for tragedies beyond your control. When his wife died, he had blamed himself for being off-world. When Nari got sick, he blamed himself for not recognizing the symptoms sooner. Guilt was a poison that ate away at the soul from inside, but it was also something that could be shared and therefore lightened. As the hours passed, their communication became more sophisticated. Kethmori began using different types of touches and sounds to express complex ideas. The dragon showed Minho mental images by pressing its forehead against the human's temples. Not true telepathy, but something close to it. Minho saw flashes of the dragon's memories, flying through nebulas that painted the void in brilliant colors, resting on asteroid fields while young stars were born in clouds of cosmic dust, fighting beside the Emperor against enemies who would have enslaved entire species if not stopped. In return, Minho shared his own memories by describing them in detail, teaching Nari to ride a bicycle on New Geneva Colony. Her first day of school, when she was so excited she forgot to eat breakfast. The night she called him crying because the other children made fun of her for being too smart. The dragon began to understand that humans formed bonds differently than its own species, but just as deeply. That love could exist without telepathy. That family was not about sharing minds, but about sharing lives. Dr. Hugh ran constant scans throughout the night. The readings showed something remarkable happening inside the chamber. Both human and dragon brain patterns were changing. Not merging like a traditional psychic bond, but synchronizing like musicians playing in harmony. Minho's stress hormones were decreasing despite being in mortal danger. His heart rate was steady and his breathing calm. Meanwhile, the dragon's aggressive neural pathways were going dormant. The parts of Kethmori's brain associated with rage and violence were shutting down, while areas linked to memory and emotional processing became more active. They were healing each other. By dawn, Minho had been in the chamber for 12 hours. He was exhausted, but oddly peaceful. Kethmori had curled its massive body around the human like a protective wall. The dragon was actually purring now, making a sound like a contented avalanche. Commander Jiwon entered the chamber personally to check on them. She moved slowly with her hands visible to show she meant no threat. Kethmori watched her approach, but made no aggressive moves. The dragon seemed to understand that she was important to Minho. Jiwon asked if Minho needed medical attention or food. He smiled and said he was fine but could use some coffee. Strong coffee. And maybe something for Kethmori to eat. The dragon had not been fed properly in days because it had destroyed every automated feeding system. Within an hour, the chamber was filled with activity. Medical teams bringing nutrition supplements for both human and dragon. Engineers installing better communication equipment. Scientists taking readings and measurements with equipment that no longer malfunctioned due to psychic interference. Through it all, Minho stayed close to Kethmori. The dragon remained calm as long as the human was nearby, but became agitated whenever he moved too far away. They had formed a connection that was different from the traditional rider bond, but just as strong. Dr. Hayuk presented his findings to the command staff. In his opinion, the bonding process was a complete success. Minho Park had achieved something that the galaxy's greatest psychic masters could not. He had reached through madness and rage to find the intelligent being trapped inside. But there was a catch. The bond worked both ways. Minho could calm the dragon, but Kethmori could also sense the human's emotional state. Right now, the dragon knew that its new partner was desperate with worry about his sick daughter. Kethmori would not be truly stable until that crisis was resolved. The Empire had its weapon back, but the weapon came with conditions that no one had expected. Commander Jiwan looked down at the unlikely pair in the chamber below. A middle-aged human soldier and an ancient dragon curled up together like old friends sharing stories by a campfire. It was not what anyone had planned, but it was definitely working. Now they had to figure out what came next. News of the successful dragon bonding spread through the Imperial capital faster than hyperspace communications. Within 6 hours of Minho's breakthrough, 3 different council members had arrived at the facility, demanding to see the results. For themselves, Council Member Kang Min was the first to enter the observation deck. He was a tall, stern man who had served the Empire for 40 years. He looked down at Minho and Kethmori with the calculating eyes of someone who saw everything as either useful or disposable. The dragon was resting with its head in Minho's lap, while the human read reports on his data pad. It looked almost domestic, except for the fact that Kethmori was large enough to swallow a transport ship whole. The peaceful scene was not what Kang Min had expected. He demanded an immediate combat readiness test. The Empire had invested enormous resources in maintaining Kethmori during its 3 years of madness. Now they needed to know if their investment would pay off. A dragon without a rider was just an expensive pet, but a bonded dragon rider was worth an entire fleet. General Taewan arrived an hour later with a full military escort. He was a practical man who measured success in terms of enemy casualties and territorial gains. The rebellion in the Outer Rim colonies was growing stronger every month. Pirates and insurgents were uniting under charismatic leaders who promised freedom from imperial rule. A dragon rider could end that rebellion in a matter of weeks. But when Taewan tried to discuss combat deployment with Minho, the conversation did not go as planned. The human was polite but firm. He would not take Kethmori into battle until his daughter received proper medical treatment. The dragon seemed to sense its rider's emotional state and refused to cooperate with any military personnel who ignored Minho's conditions. This created an impossible situation. The Empire needed their ultimate weapon, but the weapon was bonded to someone whose loyalty was divided. Minho Park cared more about his sick child than he did about Imperial military objectives. Kethmori supported whatever Minho wanted. Admiral Yuna proposed a compromise that sounded reasonable on the surface. If Minho and Kethmori could complete one demonstration mission, the Empire would provide unlimited medical care for Nari. The best doctors in the galaxy would treat her condition at no cost. All Minho had to do was prove that the Dragon Bond was combat effective. The target was a rebel stronghold in the Kepler system. Intelligence reports indicated it was heavily fortified with surface-to-air weapons that could destroy entire battle fleets. Conventional forces would take months to reduce the defenses, and casualties would be enormous. But a single dragon strike could eliminate the threat in hours. Minho agreed to consider the mission. He spent the next day reviewing tactical data and discussing strategy with Kethmori. The dragon had decades of combat experience and could provide insights that no human tactician could match. Together, they developed an assault plan that would minimize collateral damage while achieving the strategic objective. But intelligence officer Junsu had been conducting his own investigation. Something about the mission briefing troubled him. The target coordinates did not match any known rebel military installations. The weapons signatures looked wrong for a fortified position, and the civilian evacuation reports were missing from the operational files. Junsu accessed classified surveillance data using his security clearance. What he found made his blood run cold. The target was not a rebel stronghold at all. It was Harmony Ridge, a farming colony that had refused to pay increased imperial taxes. The weapons signatures were agricultural equipment that had been misidentified by automated systems. There were no rebels on Harmony Ridge, just families trying to make a living growing food for the surrounding systems. Men and women and children, who had committed no crime except wanting to keep more of what they earned through honest work. The Empire was planning to use Minho and Keth Mori to commit genocide, then eliminate both of them afterward to prevent word from getting out. Junsu had seen the contingency orders. Once the mission was complete, a fleet would be standing by to destroy the Dragon and Rider for security reasons. Junsu faced a terrible choice. He could report his findings through official channels, but that would only result in his own disappearance. The people ordering this massacre had too much power to be stopped by proper procedures. Or he could try to warn Minho directly and risk being caught before the message could be delivered. Meanwhile, Minho was making his own disturbing discoveries. During his review of the tactical data, he noticed inconsistencies that reminded him of intelligence manipulation he had seen during the war. Enemy positions that seemed too convenient, defensive capabilities that did not match the supposed threat level. He requested additional surveillance footage and found his access mysteriously restricted. When he asked for clarification about civilian populations in the target area, he was told that information was classified above his security level, but he was supposed to be the mission commander. Why would he be denied critical operational data? Keth Mori sensed Minho's growing unease. The Dragon had fought in enough battles to recognize when something felt wrong. It began examining the tactical information using its own enhanced senses. Dragons could detect emotional resonance across vast distances. If there were truly dangerous enemies at the target location, Keth Mori would be able to sense their hostile intent. Instead, the Dragon detected only confusion and fear, the emotional signature of people who were scared but not aggressive, families worried about their safety rather than soldiers preparing for battle. This was not the psychic profile of a rebel military base. Minho confronted Admiral Yuna with his concerns. He explained that both he and Keth Mori had doubts about the mission parameters. The target did not feel like a legitimate military objective. He requested permission to conduct additional reconnaissance before committing to the assault. Yuna's response was immediate and threatening. Minho had agreed to complete the mission in exchange for his daughter's medical treatment. If he was having second thoughts about honoring that agreement, perhaps Nari did not deserve to be saved after all. The Empire had many doctors, but they also had many patients who were more deserving of help. It was blackmail disguised as negotiation. Comply with orders or watch your child die. Minho left the meeting knowing that he was trapped. The Empire held all the power, and his daughter was paying the price for his moral qualms. But he also knew that something about this mission was fundamentally wrong. If he proceeded, he might save Nari, but at the cost of his own soul. That night, Junsu found a way to slip a data chip to Minho without being observed. The information it contained confirmed the humans' worst fears. Harmony Ridge was home to 12,000 civilians, including 3,000 children. The oldest military equipment on the entire planet was a handful of hunting rifles used to control crop pests. There would be no battle, only slaughter. Minho sat in the chamber with Keth Mori and showed the Dragon everything he had learned. The images of families going about their daily lives, children playing in fields of grain, elderly couples sitting on porches watching the sunset over their farms, people just like Nari who deserved to live and grow and follow their dreams. Keth Mori understood. The Dragon had been used for mass destruction before under the previous emperor. Those memories were part of what had driven it mad with guilt and shame. The creature would not willingly participate in genocide again, regardless of the consequences. Together, man and Dragon faced an impossible choice: refuse the mission and condemn an innocent child to death, or complete the mission and become mass murderers. There had to be another option. There had to be a way to save everyone. The Imperial fleet assembled at the edge of the Kepler system like vultures waiting for death. 12 heavy cruisers and their escort ships formed a battle line that could destroy entire worlds. At the center of the formation flew the carrier, ship dominance with Minho and Keth Mori in its primary launch bay. Minho checked his equipment one final time while trying to ignore the sick feeling in his stomach. His tactical display showed the approach route to Harmony Ridge. The farming colony appeared on his screens as a cluster of small settlements surrounded by agricultural zones. It looked peaceful and defenseless, because that was exactly what it was. Prince Wuman commanded the fleet from his flagship. He was the Emperor's nephew, and a man who enjoyed displaying imperial power. To him, this mission was an opportunity to demonstrate what happened to colonies that refused to pay their taxes. The destruction would serve as a warning to other worlds. Considering rebellion, Keth Mori shifted restlessly in the launch bay. The dragon could sense its rider's emotional turmoil and shared his reluctance to proceed. Around them, technicians made final preparations for launch while carefully avoiding eye contact with either human or dragon. Everyone knew this was not a normal military operation. The approach to Harmony Ridge took 3 hours at sublight speed. During the flight, Minho reviewed intelligence reports that painted the colonists as dangerous rebels armed with advanced weapons. But the descriptions did not match what his own scanners were detecting. Instead of military installations, he saw farms and schools and medical clinics. The final proof came when they entered the planet's atmosphere. Minho's tactical display lit up with energy signatures that the Empire had claimed were weapons emplacements. But Keth Mori could see what the sensors could not. These were agricultural processing plants and water purification systems, equipment designed to sustain life rather than take it. A communication came through from the surface. It was a woman's voice, speaking in the calm tones of someone trying to avoid panic. She identified herself as Mayor Che-Yung of New Haven Settlement, the colony's main town with a population of 4,000 people, including 1,500 children. She asked if the Imperial ships were there to provide aid. There had been reports of pirate activity in nearby systems, and the colonists were worried about raids. They had no military defenses and would welcome protection from the Imperial fleet. The woman had no idea she was talking to her executioner. Minho closed the communication channel without responding. He could not bear to hear the trust and hope in her voice when he knew what was about to happen. Around him, the launch bay crew prepared for Dragon deployment. In 15 minutes, he would receive the order to begin the attack. Keth Mori pressed its great head against Minho's shoulder and made a sound like a question. The dragon wanted to know if they were really going to do this, if they were going to murder innocent people to save one innocent child. For a moment, Minho considered his options. He could complete the mission and save Nari. His daughter would live to grow up and become the brilliant engineer she dreamed of being. But thousands of other children would die to make that possible. Their dreams and hopes and futures would be destroyed to preserve his own. Or he could refuse the mission and let Nari die. She would never get the medical treatment that could save her. He would have to watch his daughter fade away while knowing he could have prevented it. The guilt would destroy him, just as surely as Keth Mori had been destroyed by the death of Emperor Valdris. There had to be another choice. Some way to save everyone without becoming a monster. Then Minho realized what he had to do. The answer had been in front of him the entire time, but he had been too afraid to see it, too focused on the choice between his daughter and the colonists, to recognize that there was a third option. He could expose the truth. Instead of attacking Harmony Ridge, he would broadcast the real intelligence data to every ship in the fleet. Show them that they were being ordered to commit genocide against innocent civilians. Most Imperial soldiers had joined the military to protect people, not to slaughter them. When they learned what they were really being asked to do, many would refuse to participate. It was treason. The penalty would be death for both him and Keth Mori. But it was also the only way to live with himself afterward. Some things were more important than survival. Some choices defined what it meant to be human. Minho activated his communications array and began broadcasting on all frequencies. He transmitted the real surveillance data showing Harmony Ridge as it truly was, a peaceful farming community with no military capabilities. He included the classified files that proved the Empire knew the colonists were innocent and planned to kill them anyway. The reaction across the fleet was immediate and explosive. Ship commanders demanded confirmation from Prince Wumin. Crew members questioned orders they had assumed were legitimate. On several vessels, officers began refusing to participate in what they now recognized as mass murder. Prince Wumin responded by ordering Minho's immediate arrest for treason. Security teams prepared to storm the launch bay and take him into custody. But they had forgotten about Kethmori. The dragon would not allow its bonded partner to be harmed. When Imperial Marines approached the launch bay, they found their way blocked by a creature the size of a building whose eyes burned with protective fury. Anyone who wanted to reach Minho would have to go through a dragon first. The standoff lasted exactly 12 minutes. Then Captain Hanul of the cruiser Resolute broke formation and declared that she would not participate in the slaughter of civilians. Her ship powered down its weapons and moved to a defensive position between the fleet and Harmony Ridge. Other ships followed. Colonel Sunwoo, commanding the destroyer squadron, announced that his vessels would not fire on innocent targets. Admiral Kyung-ho remained loyal to Prince Wumin, but half his fleet was now in open rebellion. The space above Harmony Ridge became a battlefield as Imperial ships turned their weapons on each other. But this was not a fight between equals. The ships that had chosen conscience over orders found themselves heavily outnumbered by those that remained loyal to the Empire. Minho realized that his revelation had only made things worse. Now good people would die fighting each other while the colonists remained trapped in the middle. He had tried to save everyone and instead had doomed them all, unless he could find a way to tip the balance. Kethmori was the most powerful weapon. In known space, a single dragon could destroy entire fleets if properly deployed, but doing so would make Minho the very thing he had tried to avoid becoming, a killer of his own people. The dragon sensed its rider's anguish and offered a different solution. Through images pressed directly into Minho's mind, Kethmori showed him another option. They could target the command ships while avoiding vessels that had chosen to rebel, disable the fleet leadership and force a ceasefire without unnecessary casualties. It was still warfare, still violence, but it was violence in service of protecting the innocent rather than destroying them. Sometimes the choice was not between right and wrong, but between different types of necessary evil. Minho made his decision. He climbed onto Kethmori's back and felt the familiar sensation of the launch bay opening beneath them. Together, they flew into a battle that would determine not just the fate of Harmony Ridge, but the future of the entire galaxy. The dragon roared as it spread its wings among the stars. It was a sound of fury and determination that echoed across space itself, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. The real battle was just beginning. Kethmori flew through the space battle like a force of nature given form and purpose. The dragon's scales deflected energy weapons that could crack asteroids, while its own breath turned enemy fighters into clouds of glowing vapor. But Minho guided every attack with surgical precision. They targeted weapon systems and engines rather than crew quarters, disabled rather than destroyed. Prince Wumin watched from his flagship as his carefully planned genocide turned into a disaster. Half his fleet was in rebellion, and now the dragons he had counted on to restore order was systematically dismantling his remaining forces. He ordered a full retreat, but found his own ship surrounded by rebel vessels. Captain Hanul of the cruiser Resolute coordinated the rebel ships with skill born from years of fleet combat. She had served the Empire faithfully until today, but could not stomach the murder of innocents. When she saw other officers making the same choice, it gave her hope that honor was not dead in the Imperial military. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, Prince Wuman was in custody aboard the Resolute, and the surviving Imperial loyalists were fleeing toward the core worlds. The immediate threat to Harmony Ridge was over, but everyone involved knew this was only the beginning of a larger conflict. Minho landed Kethmori in the main square of New Haven settlement. The colonists emerged from their shelters to stare in wonder at the massive dragon that had saved their lives. Children who should have been dead pressed their faces against windows to get a better look at their unlikely protector. Mayor Chae-young approached cautiously with a delegation of community leaders. She thanked Minho for choosing to protect them, rather than destroy them. Her words were simple but carried the weight of thousands of lives that would continue because one man had refused to become a murderer. But the victory came with a terrible price. By defying his orders, Minho had condemned his daughter to death. The Empire would never honor their agreement to provide medical care for Nari now that he was a traitor. She would die while he lived with the knowledge that he could have saved. Her Kethmori sensed its rider's grief and nudged him gently with one massive claw. The dragon had something to show him. Through their bond came images of the rebel fleet and the colonists working together. People who had been strangers an hour ago were already sharing resources and expertise. Dr. Jisoo emerged from the crowd of colonists. She was one of the galaxy's finest neural specialists who had retired to Harmony Ridge to practice rural medicine. When she learned about Nara's condition, she offered to examine the girl's medical records. Perhaps there was something the expensive specialists on Kepler Station had missed. Within hours, a plan began to form. The rebel fleet had medical facilities and trained doctors. The colonists had manufacturing capabilities and raw materials. Harmony Ridge itself had rare minerals that could be processed into advanced medical compounds. Working together, they might be able to develop treatments that were beyond the reach of any single world, but more importantly, they had something the Empire had lost. They had people who cared more about helping each other than about following orders from distant bureaucrats who saw everything in terms of profit and control. The news of the rebellion spread across the galaxy faster than Imperial censors could suppress it. On dozens of worlds, people learned that Imperial officers had refused orders to murder civilians, that a single human and his dragon companion had chosen conscience over loyalty, that ordinary farmers had welcomed refugees from a battle they never asked to be part of. Similar uprisings began on other colonies that had suffered under Imperial taxation and regulation, not violent revolts but simple refusals to cooperate, with a system that demanded they sacrifice their principles for someone else's benefit. Planetary governments began withdrawing from Imperial trade agreements and declaring independence. Within 6 months, the Free Worlds Coalition was formally established with a simple charter. No government had the right to demand that citizens act against their own moral judgment. No authority could order the sacrifice of innocence for political advantage. And no person should face the choice between saving their loved ones and preserving their humanity. The Coalition's first act was to pool resources for medical research. Dr. Jisoo led a team that developed new treatments for neural conditions, like Naris disease. The breakthrough came from combining Imperial medical technology with traditional healing methods used by the agricultural colonies, advanced and simple working together to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. Minho received word that his daughter was responding to treatment while he was helping establish the Coalition's defense forces. Nari would not only survive, but would likely recover completely. She sent him a message saying she was proud of him for choosing to protect other children, even when it meant risking her own life. She understood what her father had done and why. It mattered. Kethmori found a new purpose as guardian of the Coalition relief missions. The dragon that had once been a weapon of conquest now protected refugee ships and defended colonies that could not defend themselves. The creature had found peace not by forgetting its violent past, but by choosing to use its power to preserve life rather than destroy it. The Imperial response was swift and brutal. Core world fleets moved to crush the rebellion before it could spread further. But they found themselves facing not just rebel ships, but entire populations who refused to be intimidated. When Imperial forces threatened one coalition world, its neighbors would send aid. What had started as a military rebellion had become something much more dangerous to the Empire: a revolution of conscience. Admiral Kyung-ho led the Imperial counterattack with 3 full battle fleets. His strategy was simple and ruthless: destroy enough coalition worlds to make the others surrender through fear. But when his forces arrived, at their first target they found Keth Mori waiting for them. The dragon had grown stronger over the months. Its bond with Minho had healed the damage caused by Emperor Valdris' death. Now it fought not from rage or duty, but from a clear understanding of what was worth protecting. The creature's psychic abilities had returned in full, and it used them to coordinate coalition defenses across multiple star systems simultaneously. The Battle of New Geneva lasted 3 days. Imperial forces hammered the planet's defenses, while Minho and Keth Mori struck at their command ships. But the real victory came when Imperial crew members began defecting in the middle of combat. Soldiers who had joined the military to protect people found themselves ordered to kill civilians, and chose to switch sides instead. By the end of the first year, the Free Worlds Coalition controlled over 40 star systems. Former Imperial officers like Captain Hanul and Colonel Sunwoo had become coalition admirals leading fleets of reformed Imperial vessels. The rebellion was no longer about independence. It was about building something better than what they had left behind. Minho often found himself thinking about the choice he had made above Harmony Ridge. He could have saved his daughter and doomed thousands of innocent people. Instead, he had risked everything on the belief that there had to be another way. That humanity's greatest strength was not the ability to make hard choices, but the refusal to accept that innocent people had to die for political convenience. Nari recovered completely from her illness and enrolled in the Coalition's new engineering academy. She designed improved life support systems for refugee ships and communication networks that helped isolated colonies stay in contact with their neighbors. Her father's choice had given her not just life, but purpose. The galaxy learned something important during those turbulent years. Humans did not fight harder than other species because they were naturally aggressive or unusually brave. They fought harder because they refused to accept that victory required abandoning their principles. When faced with impossible choices, they looked for third options that others could not see. And sometimes that made all the difference. On the 5th anniversary of the Battle of Harmony Ridge, Minho stood on the observation deck of Coalition Station, watching ships from dozens of worlds arrive for the annual remembrance ceremony. Keth Mori rested nearby, no longer the Emperor's shattered dragon, but the free guardian of all who chose conscience over convenience. His daughter, Nari, now served as chief engineer for the station. She had grown into the brilliant woman he always knew she would become. More importantly, she had grown up in a galaxy where people like her father chose to protect innocents rather than sacrifice them. The memorial ceremony honored not just those who had died in the rebellion, but the choice that had started it all. The moment when a desperate father decided that saving his child was not worth becoming a monster, that some things mattered more than personal survival, that the measure of humanity was not in how much power they could accumulate, but in how they chose to use the power they had. As the ceremony concluded, Minho received a message from the Outer Rim territories. A new crisis was developing. Refugees fleeing Imperial oppression needed protection, and the Coalition was the only force willing to help them. It would be dangerous work with no guarantee of success. Minho looked at Keth Mori and smiled. The dragon made a sound that might have been laughter. They both knew what came next. There were people who needed protecting, and they had the power to make a difference.